Hello, Internet! Welcome to episode 160 of the Assorted Calibers podcast. The Second Amendment podcast is a little bit for everyone. I'm Weer'd, and with me, as always, is the greatest hostess in the entire world. I mean, that's it. There's nothing else. That's it. Penultimate. Aaron Paulette. How you doing, Aaron?
I'd like to state for the record that I don't pay him to say these things.
Yes, you do. The laughter that you're doing, the chortles that you're making as I'm going more and more over the top is payment enough.
You are such a cheap date.
I live for this stuff. And guess what? If you're at home listening to this in your earbuds and you're chuckling about that, yes, you are making me happy.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I don't know how long it's going to last because we've got some stuff coming up. But as of this moment, things are pretty good, and I don't really have much to talk about other than, okay, I've got one superstition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, okay, but your religion, blah blah. Okay. Let's set aside for the moment the discussion about whether or not religion is a superstition. I'm talking about things that aren't related to religion. But my one absolute superstition is that, and it's probably confirmation bias, but every time I talk about the way things are good, things go bad. If I'm really looking forward to something that might happen, it won't happen. If I talk about it. If I keep my mouth shut, then I've got at least a 50-50 chance of things happening. So things are good. That's all you're getting from me.
I will note to everybody that doesn't know Aaron well enough, superstition or not, Aaron is not Catholic. That very much reeks of the Catholic guilt of the. Oh, don't talk about it. It'll change. Or you'll hear this in New England on the oh man, this is such nice weather. Don't worry, we'll pay for it this winter. Everything's a zero-sum game.
Well, see, I think the big difference between me and Catholic guilt is that Catholics are going, yes, we're all horrible sinners and we all deserve to be punished. And I, on the other hand, am more of a believer in the overdick, which is a funny game concept, but essentially it comes down to the universe will take every opportunity to screw me. It's not a matter of whether or not I deserve it. It's because the universe and causality is just a massive prick and likes to screw people over. So if I don't say anything, maybe I won't alert it to the fact, and then a good thing will sneak under its radar.
It won't notice me. Cloaking devices armed. I gotta say, my week is shaping up, but boy, it was a rough one. At 1 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday, or actually it was Thursday morning at 1. My daughter comes into our room. I don't feel good. I'm like, oh goodness. Got her a drink of water. Got rubbed her back. Got her back to sleep. And the next morning, she woke up and she was a wreck. And she was not feeling good. And so she's been going to a summer camp that week. And so I called them up and said, yeah, she's not feeling well. I'm going to keep her home. And I just was talking to the person at the desk of the school that it was at, and so so they said, and so I said, can I talk to somebody about the policy on how you guys handle sickness? Because post-COVID world, and I don't know, but I'll have the director call you back. Director called me back, and she's just like, oh, okay, well, we'll note that she's not going to be here, and she could totally come back on Friday, which was the last day of the camp. And all that, but because she's got like a sore throat and a cough and a runny nose, those are COVID adjacent things, so we'd like you to have a negative COVID test. I'm just like, okay, well, you know what? I don't know if she's going to be feeling better by tomorrow anyway. And furthermore, I would have to take the rapid action test, which I think is the one that's got the high false positive rate. And so in theory, she could test positive, and then we just have to take the long acting one just to get the negative test, and just on and on. So I said, okay, we're going to call it good. And then the next day she was still too sick to go. And so I was just babysitting a very grouchy little girl. And then come Saturday, she was feeling a little bit better, but she still had a nasty cough. And my wife and I are both like, this is not COVID. We are not concerned. I mean, even if it was COVID, the young kids really tend not, without any comorbidities, tend not to get super sick from it. So I was not concerned. But she's just like, yeah, but she's got another camp on Monday. And if she's still like hacking and coughing, they may give us a problem. So I said, okay. So we went and got a COVID test anyway. And I will have people know, I don't know if it's the rapid test is different from the PCR test. I've had the PCR test done, and my wife has several times as well. And that one is the one where they definitely smoosh the Q-tip up against your brain pan and to get whatever they need to get out of there. And so I let her know, yeah, sweetie, she was super nervous about it. I said, yeah, they're going to do it to you. It's not going to hurt, but you're not going to like it, but it's going to be over real fast. And I'm right there for you. And they just did a little doo-doo-doo-doo-doo just on the inside of her nose. And that was it. She goes, oh, that's not too bad. Of course, the doctor at the clinic said, oh, she's got a sore throat. Do you want us to do a strep test too? I'm like, that's probably a good idea. And so she got that, and
far more likely.
Yeah. And it's far more likely, and also something that we could take direct action on versus just just let it run its course. And so, yeah, so had that done. And that one is still we're going to swab the back of your throat with a Q-tip. And she's like, I didn't like that. The COVID one tickled. That one I didn't like. Yep. Well, it's all done. Let's go home. And then we were the first ones first case of the morning. So like literally like 2 hours later, like I got an email. Yep. All negative. All right. That's that. And of course, showed up at the camp today. Yeah. She's still got a little bit of a lingering cough. But I can show you her negative COVID test if you're interested. No, not really. Okay. I don't know if they would have been more interested if they were hearing her cough, and though I don't think she really was. And it turned out, and I hadn't said anything about it. I don't know. But either way, that's back. And the other good news is that on Sunday morning, I woke up and I was coughing and sneezing and had a runny nose. And I'm trying to remember if it was the main show or one of the mag dumps where I was talking about the fact that in the everything's opening back up world, we are all I'm very concerned that we are all going to get nailed because we have been isolated and not been getting sick and not been exposing ourselves to germs and all that our immune systems might be in for a bit of a surprise. And so I'm just like, oh no, what am I going to do? Oh, what am I going to do if we're going to have to cancel the show? And it turned out Ryan was busy, so I didn't record Handgun Radio this week. And then so I went and then just went to bed early every day. And I'm feeling all better now. So hooray!
Okay, so that was long and boring. I found the cartoon which I was referencing, and while you were talking, I actually talked to someone who sent it to me, and it's a comic by the titled Bad Gods by Lors Soberg. I don't know how you say his name, and it's a 4-panel comic, and I'm only going to read bits from the last 2. And the context is they're playing D&D, and one of the characters dies by one of those garbage D&D monsters called an Earseeker. And the characters, ranting about it. This is a fantasy world with dragons and tentacle panthers. My character simply believes that his fate is directed by an all-powerful, extra-dimensional sentient penis that hates to see him succeed. How is that weirder than believing in demons and genies? He's a cleric. He has to follow one of the known gods. If he wasn't constantly being screwed by the unbounded overdick, he wouldn't need healing spells. So there you go, the unbounded overdick. It's a concept I encourage you all to follow it. You don't have to believe in it. You just might need to acknowledge its existence.
That's awesome.
So, this gives us a wonderful segue, and I'm trying to get away from speaking of, because it's just so darn easy. But hey, let's talk about some dickery that is unbounded. And let's just talk about the big dick himself, David Chipman. What's going on with him, Weer'd? Because last I heard, there was supposed to be a big vote on Thursday, and here we are the next Monday, and we still don't have an ATF director.
I mean, so I'll say right now, like every single show that we've talked about, except for like the very first one where he was first nominated, and we talked about everyone get on there and let your senators know ahead of time, and you even said let your senators know now and let your senators know before the vote. And I'll tell you right now, this week I'm going to send probably just going to do a direct copy of the previous email that I sent to Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey, just to let them know that, hey, you're letting a special interest lobbyist into that's aligned with Michael Bloomberg in as an ATF director. Maybe you wouldn't want to do that, and just to apply a little bit more pressure, since we are. If there's going to be a vote, but every episode where we've mentioned his name, I keep thinking, is this going to fall on deaf ears? Because by the time the show comes out, are people already, is the vote going to already be done? And no vote yet. And at the time of this, there's no vote. And I don't know, because David Chipman, there was a committee. The committee is, I forget how many people are in the committee, if it's 10 or what, but it's 50-50 Democrats and Republicans.
All right, so it's gotten out of the Judiciary Committee 50-50, and that means anyone can bring it before a vote, but he hasn't come before a vote.
No.
And I was picking your brain on this, and you have an interesting theory that it's not quite tinfoil hat, but it's close.
I mean, I don't think it's tinfoil hat. I mean, all the Republicans in the committee voted against him. All the Democrats voted for him. Now it's anybody's game to present him to the floor of the Senate for a vote. And clearly the Republicans, they can present it to a vote, but they haven't, because they're perfectly fine with not dealing with him at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the Democrats, and of course also if they just assume that all the Democrats are going to vote for him, they can get him confirmed. And so therefore they don't want it to be voted on. But the Democrats, if they thought they had all the votes, they could get him confirmed. So why haven't they called a vote on Mr. Chipman? And I suspect it's because they don't have the votes. Certainly they were hoping for some more moderate Republicans like Susan Collins, who has openly said she is not going to support him. Of course, we've got Joe Manchin of West Virginia. He's a Democrat, and he has supported gun control laws in the past, but he's also not what you would call super anti-gun, and he's being awfully quiet about it, but he has also openly spoken about the anti-gun bills that have been pushed through, and he's saying like, yeah, no, I'm not riding with you guys anymore.
Weirdington Elizabeth Beard, you are either having your ADD Swiss cheese memory moment, or you are being deliberately disingenuous.
Okay.
You had a theory that the plan was to have Chipman deliberately wither on the vine as a repudiation to Michael Bloomberg and his policies.
Oh, that is true. I was thinking on the stuff that we had at hand, but that is true. There is another angle to this.
That's what I want you to explore.
Okay.
Yes.
So my thoughts are, David Chipman was a direct employee of Michael Bloomberg when he was with, I think he started with Mayors Against Illegal Guns and was with him through the Everytown switch. He then left and worked for ShotSpotter, and then left ShotSpotter only after, I think, 2 years, and has been working ever since, including currently for the Giffords anti-gun group. I would note that the Weird conspiracy theory is that Giffords, maybe not Americans for Responsible Solutions, but Giffords is a Bloomberg organization. It's not directly on paper, but Giffords changed its name from Americans Responsible Solutions to just the mononym Giffords, at the same time that the Brady campaign changed its name from the Brady campaign to simply Brady. And then they all went from groups that were kind of keeping a healthy distance of each other, not antagonistically, but much like, the Second Amendment Foundation doesn't do like joint operations with the NRA. It's just how they roll. They're their own beast. And now all of a sudden, they're like, anytime there's like a big live event, it's all of those groups working together and they're all sharing a stage. And so I think it's because Michael Bloomberg, they were all near bankruptcy. So he could have bought them for short money, just discharge their debts and take over their operating expenses. And that's all you need to do. And that's a group that he could control without people knowing that he created it, like Everytown and the Trace and March for Our Lives, etc. All that being said, when Bloomberg dropped out of the presidential race, he promised the DNC that he would give them, I think, $1 billion for the general campaign fund, and he would campaign for Joe Biden. He produced.
By the way, this isn't the first promise he's broken, because he also promised to the people who left their jobs and relocated to work for his campaign that they would be employed through November, and they weren't.
Yep.
So Bloomberg will screw anybody. He will screw the DNC, and he will screw the little people.
Yep.
Just so you know.
Yeah, that was a big ask for anybody to work for Michael Bloomberg, because remember, he skipped out on both Iowa and New Hampshire. Like, he wasn't even on the ballot there. Massachusetts was the first place where anyone had a chance to vote on him in the primaries. And so, yeah, the idea of come work for me. You haven't even gone to the first ones. You're coming in late in the game. Like, you're a born loser. Don't worry. I'll keep you all employed through November. And then he stayed for, I think, 2 months and then cut everybody loose. And so, yeah, I think that the fact that he's reneged on all of these big promises to the DNC, we've had Biden talking so much, and we'll be talking about this in a little bit. He's been talking a big talk about gun control, and he could do a whole bunch. He could sign executive orders. He could be doing they could push through the bills. They've got a Democrat majority in both the House and Senate, and yet it's not happening. And there's not really a big talk on why. And I kind of wonder if it's just, we don't want to abandon gun control because it's been such a core tenet, but we don't want to actually do it. And we certainly don't want to do anything that would make Michael Bloomberg happy. That's my theory.
Okay, so just to clarify, because I didn't hear you say the thing, the entire point of this, maybe not the point of dragging all this out, but the reason why he hasn't been nominated and why you believe he won't be nominated is because the DNC cannot deliberately punish Bloomberg. They're going to punish his flunky who is enacting Bloomberg's policies. So this is essentially the DNC giving two extended middle fingers to Bloomberg's anti-gun work and by proxy to Bloomberg himself. This is payback for last year.
Yep.
And so we are going to let your chosen candidate wither on the vine, and he's going to be publicly mocked, and there's not a thing you can do about it.
Yeah, and what a man to mock. I mean, we've talked about a bunch. You've seen him do weird audio fisks, but furthermore, there's been some more information coming out with David Chipman, and not only is he anti-gun, not only is he a special interest lobbyist, not only is he a liar and just generally a condescending jerk when it comes to gun owners and people that disagree with him publicly. I will note that he referred to anybody who disagreed with him in a Ask Me Anything as trolls. He's also a terrible person. I mean, and that's
he's a racist piece of
crap.
Let's just lay it all out there.
Yes, and not just the whole like covering for the ATF for Waco, but he has lost a firearm because he stored it incorrect against company agency policy in his car, and his car was broken into, and his issued Sig Sauer was stolen.
Yeah, I want to hammer that. The guy who is going to or aspires to be head of the nation's agency that handles firearm laws disregarded agency's laws about storage and lost his firearm.
Mm-hmm.
This alone should invalidate him.
Yeah. And I will add that I didn't talk about this because I missed it in time for the show and then didn't feel like the need to bring it back up. But it was one of the quotes that I had in the Weird audio fisc of David Chipman when he was talking to Detroit News, where he was talking about all these new gun buyers, and he was comparing them to Tiger King. And he said that they should just hide the gun behind the stacks of tuna in their pantry. And he was specifically talking about new gun owners. He addressed them directly. And then when questions on that, he just outright gaslighted and lied and said, no, I was making fun of me. Well, I guess the unsafe storage of a firearm isn't too far out of whack. So,
but let's get to the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
there are some allegations. They haven't quite got the Freedom of Information Act yet that I'm aware of. I did a quick search for it. They might be out by the time the show airs, but there's definitely some strong allegations involving sexual harassment of ATF employees. But there is the big one that I was absolutely floored by, and in this day and age, I cannot believe, and I'll probably put this in the letter to Senator Warren and Senator Markey, is that David Chipman made a very, very public remark. This was not in close company, with a statement of there was a large number of African American, I guess, trainees, or they were already confirmed agents.
So, the Daily Caller notes a former ATF agent claimed Chipman was reviewing exam results from individuals wishing to be a special agent in charge when he allegedly said, "Wow, there were an unusually large number of African American agents that passed the exam this time. They must have been cheating," unquote. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Chipman didn't say African American. I'm not saying he specifically said the N-word, but African American sounds too polite coming out of this guy's mouth. I'm guessing he said black.
But yeah, he essentially questioned the intelligence of African Americans as a whole, because it wasn't just one agent that, maybe there was a guy and he was not the brightest, he was not the sharpest tool in the shed. And he, instead of referring to him by who he was, referred to him by his race, which would also, why would you choose that as the key thing to say? But that would be a little less damning than, wow, there's a whole lot of them here. They must have been cheating, because clearly that would, the natural thing that David Chipman was expecting is a whole bunch of African American agents failing, because that's what African American agents do. It's awful. It is awful. There's no way to slice it. And according to this report, it was heard by a large number of agents, and they were all very, very upset about it. And I assume there was some reprimand that went on for that. And hopefully by the time this show comes out and before a vote happens, this information comes out. And I gotta say, if there were agency, a formal censures of Chipman or whatever demerits against him for sexual harassment and racist conduct, I guarantee the Biden administration knew about this before they nominated him, which would play directly into the hand of, yeah, let's nominate Bloomberg's guy. That sounds wonderful. So we shall see. Either way, now is the time to go. If you haven't written your senators, write them. Let them know that Chipman is terrible He's a terrible guy, and this person will be in charge of all of the stuff that potentially potentially might be coming into effect during the Biden administration, and he's not the type of person that should hold this position at all. It'll be bad for the ATF. It'll be bad for gun owners, and it'd be good for Michael Bloomberg. So that's my soapbox. But transitioning, what I was talking about is that Biden made this big anti-gun speech. I've got a link to it in the show notes. I don't know if I'm going to do a weird audio fisc on it because it's like 20 minutes long, and I don't know if I can put enough magic on that to make it so that you will understand what the hell he's talking about in the podcast. I mean,
it's hard to understand him anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those, like, I'm not going to harp on him too much. A lot of other people harp on how old he is and the potential of his cognitive decline. But I'm just going to point out the fact that Joe Biden has been a public politician since, I think definitely before I was born. I think before you were born too, Aaron. And so he has been giving public speeches for a long, long, long time, both in campaigns and as an elected official. And now all of a sudden he can't do it anymore. And that should be frightening to anybody. This should be like him riding a bike. And so if you suddenly saw Lance Armstrong just fall off his bike on flat pavement, be like, wait, what's going on? Did Lance have a stroke? Yeah. So, but either way, he's mumbling, he's bumbling. It's very hard to understand. It's both in just the physical enunciation and the coherency of the statements. But it's Biden. He's being anti-gun. Is it true or is it lip service? You be the judge. But I have a link also in the show notes to the fact sheet that was also released along with this. Did you get a chance to read this, Aaron?
I could have sworn we commented about this weeks ago, and I mentioned some things that the Liberal Gun Club, where they more or less fisked it, mm-hmm. and they found a lot of problems with it. And then
this is a different one. It
looks very similar to it.
It is very
similar. And honestly, it was just, I saw a lot of garbage and my eyes rolled.
Yep.
So no, I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is very, very similar to, the first big one where he did the speech in the Rose Garden, where this is where he officially announced that David Chipman was the nominee. And so it is very similar to that. The few different points is that he is stating that they are going to take extra steps to go against bad apple gun dealers. And I will point out the fact that this is something that the anti-gunners have been talking about forever. Like, very small percentage of the guns recovered at crime scenes come from, or a bulk of the guns recovered at crime scenes come from a very small number of gun shops. And these are quote unquote bad apple gun dealers. It's not true. If it was, you could shut them down. No matter how they always complain, oh, the ATF's underfunded. Yeah. Go to these gun shops, find out what crimes they did, and then shut them down. You don't think they're doing that? Of course they're doing that. How do you think they know what the shops are? And they know that it's not a crime. It's simply, these are gun shops that are in high crime areas, and so therefore its customers are more than likely to have guns stolen, or they are high volume places. So yeah, when a straw buyer walks in, how do you not have a straw buyer go through? I mean, I've heard, some gun shops say, oh, I'm not going to sell to minorities because they're the ones that have straw buyers. Or no, I'm not going to sell to women because they're the girlfriends of the gangbangers. It's crap. You don't do that. That's just racist, sexist, horrible crap. And so it happens. And the more guns you sell, and again, time to crime is like 13 years. It's like 10 years on average, and 13 years in these high crime areas. So if a place has been open for 50 years, the chances of a chunk of their guns showing up in ATF trace data, pretty high. So it's nonsense. So they're going to talk about cracking down on it. It's either going to be nothing or they're going to do like what Clinton did and just start purging the rolls of gun stuff. Find people that are doing clerical errors. Find people that have a certain number of guns that aren't accounted for in their inventory, or a certain number that have showed up in crime scenes, and say that's a violation and revoke their license. The ATF really doesn't need anything to revoke someone's license. Your license is at the pleasure of the ATF. And so, that's what happened to the kitchen table gun dealers. Is just Clinton just said, yeah, if you're zoned in a residential area, pull their license. And they did. So that's the one thing. More talk about ghost guns. There's some talk about other factors, of which I need to read into these, but there is some stuff that isn't directly gun control and is more community outreach groups. So these have had mixed effects. Some have been good. Some have bad, but as far as the Assorted Calibers podcast is concerned, so long as you're not taking my guns away and claiming that it's going to help people out, I'm fine with it. And so one last bit, and this was really just too good for me to leave alone. I'll just read the headline here. This is top Biden advisor blames guns for crime surge and insists Republicans defunded police. I'd like to see his sources on that. I mean, what can I say? It's crap. This guy is Cedric Richmond. It does it say what his position is? I actually hadn't heard of this guy, but they're saying that he's a Biden advisor, and he's just going on this nonsense that the surge in gun buying is causing the crime wave that's happening. Happens to be in mostly anti-gun places. And then also say that it's the Republicans who have been defunding police, which, there's a couple. One of the states is Atlanta, Georgia. And, the police have really taken a hard hit in Atlanta. And I don't think it was at the urging of Republicans. Just saying.
So his official position is senior advisor to the president and director of the White House Office of Public Engagement.
Wow. Okay. I'm there. Now I have heard of him, and my opinion is not good.
I mean, he used to be a congressman, whatever the term is for not a senator, representative. There you go. And that ended when he was, handpicked, appointed, whatever, by Biden. So, yeah, pretty much a professional politician.
Well, there. Good for him. And he's a liar.
All right, so we've got all that, and that's unpleasant. And again, not to attract the ire of the unbounded Overdick, but there is some good news, at least on the horizon. So we've heard about how the ATF is turning a jaundiced eye towards pistol braces. And it's starting to look like that's going to be withdrawn, because nearly every single Republican senator, there are 50 of them, and 48 have demanded the withdrawal of this pistol brace ban. And the ATF has received over 100,000 comments. And so it's starting to look like this is going to go the way of a previous pistol brace ban and the 2014 attempt to ban the green tip ammo.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, Biden is doubling down on this. He says a lot. We haven't seen him do anything, which is good for us. But right now, it looks like this isn't going to happen. And one of the things that was mentioned in here is that the ATF is already overstressed. And for the people who own pistol braces to suddenly go ahead and register them as SBRs is going to further put them underwater. Mm-hmm. Here's something I wanted to mention earlier, and this is just an aside. The ATF has operated without a director for more years than it has with a director. I think the last director was quit, retired, was fired around 2008?
2006.
Something like that?
Yeah.
2006. Okay, so for most of the Obama administration and the Trump administration, we haven't had an ATF director. The ATF gets along fine without directors. So that's the end of my aside. But yeah.
Well, I wanted to point out the fact that we were both shocked by this. We were talking about this, and it's not quite true that it's been more without that. I said that to you, and then I looked it up and realized, oh, that's not true, and that's because up until 2006, it was or until 2001 or 2, whatever it was. ATF directors essentially served at the pleasure of the president. So the president could appoint a director to the ATF and they would assume the position. And when the Patriot You're welcome. and the Patriot Act made, I believe, the ATF director and the director of the FBI, there might be some other positions in there as well. But the Patriot Act said that they needed to be approved by the Senate first. And so that's where all of this rigmarole that came from. And from then on, nobody has been approved because it's always been suddenly a political deadlock.
Okay. All right. So I rescind the comment based upon faulty information given to me by Worthington Elizabeth Beard.
It's all my fault.
About the ATF not having a director for a long time. Okay. But that said, The objections are along the lines of the ATF is already horribly inefficient. You're going to dump more loads on it. Mm-hmm. Plus, and it's actually not mentioned here in this article we're referencing from the Reload, but I would like to point out that pistol braces were originally designed for owners, usually veterans, who were missing an arm so that they could operate an AR-15 with one hand. This means that pistol braces are, I don't know what the proper term is. It's a disability device. In other words, the American Disabilities Act could be brought into play here. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's a battle the ATF wants to fight. I don't know if they could win that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember. I know that the palm pistol, the little gun that essentially you'd squeeze in your hand, that it was designed.
Yes,
to fire.
I know. I shot it. I reviewed it.
Yeah, I'm letting the listeners know in case they had forgotten about it. And yeah, that palm pistol was ADA approved. I believe that also goes for the pistol braces. So yeah, that it is literally like banning wheelchairs or crutches.
All right, so the rest of this episode is nothing but interviews. And the main reason for that is because most of our regular contributors were at a convention this weekend. They were at a convention in Tennessee having fun and doing gun things, and I wasn't there with them. So they... How dare they have fun without us and not submit segments? But that's all right.
Or come over to my house and take care of my sick kid.
but that's all right, because Weer'd has not one, but 2 interviews. Weer'd, what's the first interview you have for us?
So the first one, I sat down with Ian McCollum from, of course, Forgotten Weapons and Headstamp Publishing. And I had a burning question that I always wanted to ask him. He is a well-known collector of French rifles and militaria. And some may know this, but others may not, that his father actually wrote his own collector's book on Japanese rifles. And so the question I had to ask for him is, how does one get into this form of collecting, especially some more of the off-the-beaten-path things like French rifles? I am happy to welcome back to the Assorted Calibers podcast, Ian McCollum of Forgotten Weapons and Headstamp Publishing. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing well. I guess you haven't gotten tired of me yet.
I mean, come on. Does anybody get tired of you?
Possibly my wife sometimes.
Oh, wives. I've got one of those too. So this is like one of those, like, all right, your first appearance on the show, we were talking about your time as a bartender, just because I thought that would be hilarious. Have Ian on the show and not talk a whit about guns. But
Yep.
But also one of the little like tidbits that I had been aware of you, and I think I'd even probably, worked with you on Handgun Radio before I even knew that your father was also a well-known firearms collector and author.
Yes. Yeah. He wrote a book, like 30 years ago now on Japanese rifles, Arisakas.
And so, I mean, obviously, your father's not here to talk about those specifically, but I just found that interesting that your father was a well-known collector and author on Japanese rifles. And of course, I mean, not lesser known fact about Ian McCollum that he is absolutely in love with French arms.
Possibly.
And so as someone I am not a true collector. I have a collection, I guess you could say. I have an arsenal of my personal firearms, but I am definitely more of an accumulator. I see something, I like it, I buy it, and then I don't sell anything. and that's just how it works. And I don't really have a whole lot of rhyme or reason that true collectors like yourself do. But I just thought it would be interesting to hear about if you were aware of how your father got started with Japanese rifles, and then I know how you got started with French rifles and French firearms.
Yeah, actually, yes. There's a pretty simple explanation to it. My dad, when I was quite young, to the point that I don't really remember any of this, he had an FFL. He was one of the notorious kitchen table FFLs. And he wanted to make some money at, buying and selling guns, but he also wanted to have a collection. Well, my father was born on Saipan, an island in the Pacific, which at the time, if I remember correctly, was a United Nations trust, like state island thing. It is today a U.S. Commonwealth. And my dad was born there because my grandfather was working for the government and was stationed there in the 1950s. So my dad had this kind of innate built-in connection to Japanese side of World War II. Of course, Saipan was a huge battle in World War II when we took that island back from the Japanese. And so that's the subject matter that he chose to collect. But in order to, if you want to do particularly well in firearms trading and collecting, you need to kind of specialize. You can't know everything about everything. And so he, ironically, looking back on it, he decided to also buy and sell in French guns. And the way he put it to me is, oh, yeah, the French stuff, I just had no interest in keeping it. So there was no temptation. So he focused on Japanese and French, kept the Japanese, and used basically used French gun trading to make money to buy Japanese rifles for his own collection.
And so was that your start as a Francophile? Was all these French guns coming and going from your kitchen table?
No, what's funny about it is by the time I was really cognizant of the whole thing, he'd given up his FFL and he was just collecting. So the French stuff all happened before I was aware of it. What I remember growing up is just his Japanese rifle collection.
So where does what's the first French firearm that you owned?
Oh, geez. I never actually thought about that. It would have been some flavor of Berthier, but I honestly have no idea which one. What happened to me is I started off just accumulating guns, exactly like you describe. And as they got maybe a little voluminous, I realized I really ought to focus on something, or else, it's cool to have a little bit of this and that and everything, but it doesn't really develop anywhere unless you have a giant warehouse and you just literally buy everything. And so I looked around at, opportunities for a collecting focus. And I realized, first off, at that point, I had a couple of pretty good rare French rifles. I had a fantastic example of a Berthier cavalry carbine, which are fairly hard to find. And the French stuff it's unusual. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but the French didn't really export it to anybody, and the French never really bought guns from other people. Basically everyone else in World War I had some sort of Mauser or Lee Enfield, but the French always had their distinctively French state-produced rifles. And I like that bit of obscurity. Coupled with, at the time, there was nothing written in English. They're underappreciated. Nobody wants them, which means they're cheaper, easier for me to get. So yeah, that's what led me to focus on French rifles specifically. I'm very happy that I did. It's a really cool collection now.
Have you personally driven up the market values for French militaria?
I think the general conclusion is that I have, although I don't want to take credit for it, or maybe I just don't want to take the blame for it. There are some other compounding factors, I think. Like in France, until 2012, military caliber firearms were very heavily regulated, and that included 8mm Lebel. And so when they changed that law, there has been, I think, a bit of an influx of especially Lebels going back to France because they're in high demand over there now that they can be more easily owned. That drove up prices on Lebels. And then the centenary of World War I drove up prices on Lebels and Berthier's both. And then, of course, today we see the just general environment blowing the prices out of the water on everything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think about the fact that I got into Mosin Nagant collecting, kind of, sort of. There's a few things of interest. I'm still looking for the world. You put up a video on the American Mosins with, I think you were at Rock Island, for that video. And you said there's going to be a link to the auction. This was back when you could still link to the auction on YouTube. And I just took a deep breath, and I definitely felt myself damp with perspiration going, all right, I'm going to click over on this, and I'm going to spend way too much money because it was a really nice Westinghouse and a really nice Remington. And I have a Westinghouse that's interesting, but I don't have a Remington, and I've always wanted one. And I'm like, oh gosh, am I going to spend $4,000 on a pair of garbage Russian rifles? And I clicked on it, and it happened to be when I watched that video, the auction had closed, and I said, oh, thank God.
Sometimes it's safer that way.
I won't have the thing that I like. I'll still be wanting it, but at least my wallet will be intact.
Yeah. The auctions have driven prices on stuff up too. I think there's we have an element of, in pandemic, nobody can go out, nobody's going to gun shows. And so there are a lot of people who take their gun buying budget and they don't have an opportunity to really search for stuff. And there are auction companies that have here's a catalog full of everything right here. Mm-hmm. And that makes it easy. And so people are willing to spend more because it's accessible and available.
So do you want to talk about like a couple of the crown jewels in your collection?
Oh, let's see. Well, some of them, the ones that I'm most proud of or the ones I'm happiest to have are some of the ones that are the least appreciated. Mm-hmm. Like in particular, I have a colonial Berthier, which is, I guess the short version is it's the rifle that the French slightly modified to turn into their substitute standard World War I infantry rifle. So it's a model of 1907, which they turned into the 07/15. But in 1907 pattern, very few of them were made. We're talking a couple tens of thousands, and the vast majority of them were either destroyed or rebuilt during World War I. And I was fortunate enough to get one before many people really cared about them. There was a collector by the name of Robert Ferris, who lived up in northern Arizona, worked his entire life at the Yuma Proving Grounds, and before that, the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, he helped do machine gun development. And on his spare time, he would take his own machine guns out to the range and shoot them. He was the stereotypical gun guy. And he had a pretty darn nice collection of French rifles. He passed away a number of years ago. And when he did, all his guns went to auction. And the low end stuff, which included virtually all the French guns, went to the Poulin auction house. And they lotted together this completely original serial number matching. You can still read this very crisp stock cartouche, 1907 Berthier with a pair of 1902 Indochina Berthiers, which are almost as rare. And I was able to get that whole batch for a criminally low price by today's standards. It remains, I think it is the only all original intact 1907 I've seen in the US. I'm sure there are a couple others around, but I haven't seen them myself.
Oh, that's crazy. Anything else?
Pretty cool. There's a lot of cool stuff.
I mean, you've got a FAMAS, and it's one of those I don't even know how did you end up getting your hands on that? Because that's not like a gun that you see at a gun shop or anything like that.
No, but the thing with the FAMAS though is they're around, and the only thing that prevents you from getting a FAMAS basically is your willingness to dump a giant pile of money on it. I'm personally, like, I'm more proud of having the guns that are really hard to find than the ones that are just really expensive.
Yeah.
In the case of my FAMAS, I'd been doing some work with Larry Vickers, and he has a full auto FAMAS and a semi-auto FAMAS. And I basically spent about 6 weeks poking him, going, "Hey, you don't need both. Like, you have a full auto. Why would you want this stupid semi-auto FAMAS anyway? Poke, 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 poke. You should sell it to me. You should sell it to me." And eventually he caved in and sold it to me.
Well, there.
That's how I got it. Yeah.
Well,
worked out nicely.
It's got a nice provenance. It's both Ian McCollum's FAMAS and it's formerly Larry Vickers' FAMAS. That's actually really rad.
Yep. So that was a cool one. I guess probably the other batch that I'm really excited to have are a series of developmental rifles, or not developmental, but a series of rare rifles from the 1870s and 80s, when the French were first developing their repeating rifles. So they started with a tube-fed, basically a Kropatschek rifle that they bought straight up from Steyr in 1878. And then they had a couple patterns, an 1884 pattern and an 1885 pattern that they developed in France that were, again, basically Kropatschek tube magazine guns in 11 millimeter. And those lasted for a very short time before all of a sudden French chemists invent smokeless powder. And now the 11 millimeter black powder cartridge is totally obsolete. And in a bit of a rush, they developed the Lebel based on those Kropatschek style guns. And so I've been able to put together a set of all of the developmental steps that led up to that. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, that is cool. I always like to have like the chronology setting alongside, which I'm sure you had a ball doing in your book, the Chassepot de FAMAS.
Yeah, the unfortunate part, a couple of them I didn't actually have when we did the book. So we've got pictures from some other places, but they're not quite the quality of pictures I would like. So if or when we do an expanded second edition of the book, we've got the real thing here now to take pictures of. The culmination of that actually was I found a pre-production Lebel number 22 in France. And it took me like 6 or 8 months, but I was able to buy that and import it into the US, and it is cherry.
That's cool. Yeah, you've talked a little bit on your channel about it being quite the pain to import firearms. How many have you ended up importing?
I think 4 at this point. And they've started to go smoother now. I found a guy who does a far better job with handling small arms importation. My first couple were a disaster. But the first one actually was a trade, which made it even worse. I found a French sniper rifle collector who desperately wanted a Type 99 Arisaka sniper, which, they're pretty darn scarce here in the US, but they're completely unavailable in Europe, because why would there be Arisakas in Europe, really? And he had a pair of MOS 36 paratrooper rifles. And he offered me a swap of one of his folding stock, short-barreled MOS 36 paratroopers for a Type 99 sniper. And I was able to find one. But then the process of both exporting and importing a rifle at the same time was, that deal took like 18 months to actually do. It was it sucked.
And in the end, it was just a trade.
It's just a trade. So it did finally work out. And I'm happy to have done it now, but man, I will happily give a plug to Polaris Logistics. If you need firearms import-export, their guy is Les Winner, and man, he's awesome.
Well, that's all. I'll put a link to them in the show notes. So I guess I can kind of end with the really, it's kind of a canned question because, let's be honest, like, what's the note to the collector? It's just, you collect what you love, and you don't get to choose what you love.
Well, I would emphasize that you shouldn't let anyone else choose what you love.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I get people asking me, like, what cool gun should I buy for my collection? I'm like, hey, I can't possibly answer that. Even if I could, you don't want my answer. Because, my answer is going to be a Vertier or something. Like, find what interests you. And it doesn't matter if the market considers that $100 piece of junk, like, a Chinese mystery pistol, or a $10,000, you want to get into collecting Walkers and Colt single action armies? If you like it, go for it. I hope you have the bank account. But, you could build a fantastic collection on something like Steyr 1895 straight pulls. They're cheap, but man, the number of variations, especially in the carbines, it's fascinating.
And I think you mentioned once you have a friend who collects only well-done sporterized military rifles.
Not quite only, but that's a big chunk of what he likes. Yeah, especially antique ones. So he loves finding like 1897 dated sporterized Swedish Mausers, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're dirt cheap and they're unregulated. Yeah.
And again,
I mean, he also has a collection of high points, but that's beside the point.
I gotta say, I've got attractions to the ugly ducklings as well. Unfortunately, I live in Massachusetts, so many of the quote unquote garbage guns are essentially unavailable to me, or I would end up spending way more than I would be pleased to do to try to get my hands on one. But like, I have never actually seen a high point in a gun shop available to me. Like I see them when I go up to New Hampshire and Maine and kick tires in at gun shops, but in Massachusetts, I have never even seen one in the county. I mean, they must exist, but I just don't know where they are.
Wouldn't have thought there was any good reason to live in Massachusetts, but I guess that's an ancillary benefit.
Oh gosh.
Sort of.
Oh, don't get me started, Ian. On that note, I am going to be sick of you and kick you off the show.
Oh.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Ian McCollum of Forgotten Weapons and Headstamp Publishing.
Thanks.
So I think it's funny that his father acquired French rifles just to sell them so that he could get the Japanese rifles. And so his son is like, hey, you don't like these? I think these are kind of cool. Mm-hmm. I'm going to collect them.
And then if you notice, he was talking about that import trade that just took forever to happen. It was literally him trading a Japanese rifle that was probably one of his father's for a French rifle. And also, yes, for those listening and wondering what that was, Ian did bring his emotional support Chinese pistol.
Click, clack, clickety, clickety, clack, clack. All right, so this next interview, even though I didn't conduct it, became rapidly near and dear to my heart for reasons which will be immediately apparent once they are mentioned. And, yeah. So Weer'd is talking to a friend of the show, Paloma Capanna, and she's going to discuss a name you don't know but should, Jessica Watkins.
Well, I'm pleased to have back on the Assorted Calibers podcast, Paloma Capanna. She's an attorney who works for Second Amendment rights and rights in general. And you know what, Paloma? You were just talking to me about someone who I didn't even know her name. Can you tell me about Jessica Watkins?
I would like to do that because she really isn't getting the kind of attention that she deserves in her situation. So the events of January 6 occur. The FBI and the Department of Justice go running after people to charge them as quickly as possible. They call this, to the public, it's public knowledge, they call this the shock and awe campaign. They wanted to get as many people indicted and charged and arrested as they possibly could before the inauguration. One of the very first people swept up in the shock and awe campaign is Jessica Watkins. She is from Ohio. She is a transgender female. She is a veteran. She had served several years in the armed services. And somehow she finds herself at the U.S. Capitol, is part of what the DOJ calls a snake of people who winds their way sort of through the crowds, and it makes for really good graphics. And so, you know, they want to make sure they charge the individuals in this conga line very early. She has assigned counsel and has been through a few different attorneys. Now, I'll just point out to our listeners, that's not necessarily unusual, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of really good assigned counsel attorneys out there. And I would say that the woman who is representing Ms. Watkins at this point is really trying to get the story forward. So as I started pulling indictments and pulling the criminal complaints and going through them, I suddenly see this paper by her attorney as part of a motion to have Ms. Watkins released on bail pending trial. And in the sort of tail end of this lengthy paper, there are allegations as to how Ms. Watkins is being treated within the prison system. So Jessica Watkins is in prison in Virginia and is classified by the prison system as male. And among the treatment that Jessica Watkins has suffered since she's been incarcerated and bail was denied is being stripped naked and left with the lights on in her cell for a period of days. Now, I just want to make sure everybody who is out there listening and has been kind of half catching this and now has stopped, right? Let me just say this very clearly. I'm talking about a prison on United States soil in Virginia. I am talking about a United States citizen. I am talking about Jessica Watkins. And I'm talking about somebody who may well be, if you will, defined by history as the first American to be treated like an enemy combatant on U.S. soil.
Yeah, I mean that whole idea that harkens back to the terrible photographs coming out of the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq during the Iraq War. On the is there any documentation on why she was treated this way?
So the way it was pled out was that she suffered an injury to her arm, requested medical treatment, did not receive it, started a hunger strike, and this was the reaction to her hunger strike.
And is this a standard procedure? Because, I mean, when I think prisoners, I'm thinking the orange jumpsuits or sometimes the pink jumpsuits and all of that. The idea of removing a prisoner's clothing seems extremely out of the ordinary.
Not if we still as a nation for 20 years, I mean, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary, right, of 9/11. We still have not dealt with a topic that I have been on since way back, and that's enhanced interrogation techniques. Generally not spoken about. Generally, anytime I try to bring up the subject person to person, I see people cringe. I'm used to handling some fairly heavy-duty domestic violence issues, so EITs sort of fit into that wheelhouse, if you will. I have 26 years in courtrooms, and the DV component had been straight the way along since I had started practicing. So when EITs first started making the news, if you will, at the CIA black sites abroad in Europe immediately following 9/11, it was a topic that I could start looking into right away.
And so, of course, EIT standing for Advanced Interrogation Tactics.
Enhanced interrogation techniques, yes, right, of which there are a number. But the notion of continuous light and trying to take a person out of the natural rhythms of the 24-hour cycle as the earth spins and we have day and night, the notion of a person being stripped naked and left on public view, right, the humiliation that goes on there. The EITs have, to some degree, been published and been brought somewhat to light, and the person who authored them disgraced, himself, and yet they still remain a viable policy used by the United States. There was never a point at which, there was an international tribunal that was conducted about it. It simply happens. So when people say, we are the shining beacon of democracy and human rights and ethical treatment of prisoners, and if China issues a report that talks about solitary confinement, for example, in the U.S., the U.S. media tends immediately to say, that's China, hypocrites. But that's exactly what the Chinese are saying is, wait a minute, in America, you have some techniques that are accepted. EITs have not been used, to my knowledge, against U.S. prisoners up until this point.
And so was she being interrogated? Was there more interrogation to be done? Was she still under investigation, or because she was charged with a crime and in jail and trying to get bail? So this doesn't strike me as there's something that's missing here.
Absolutely correct. And that's exactly where, if you will, my mind goes. And that's part of why I wrote the book and pushed the book out, is I want folks to start to look a little deeper past what's going on in your television. Turn your television off, turn on, more Weird Beard podcasts for sure, but really start to use your brain. Ask yourself, this kind of a report goes in a proceeding pending before a judge, and the Department of Justice does not answer those charges. They do not respond to those paragraphs. Now, normally, when attorneys are working on papers, we are working very hard to line it up and respond to everything as you go. So imagine, if you will, that Ms. Watkins' attorney's allegations are serious. They are serious. What I expected to see in the DOJ response was absolutely not, that is ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. But instead, the DOJ responsive paper, zero. And what's ended up happening is that her request for bail actually ended up getting put on hold. Equally bizarre in terms of her case. So of the original 12 defendants who the DOJ made some allegation that they were members of the Oath Keepers, 9 of them were released. 3 of them are still in prison. Jessica Watkins is one of them. And it is absolutely out of whack to the charges brought against her.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, really quick, can you just, for those that may not know, tell us a little bit about the group, the Oath Keepers?
Oath Keepers is a fairly interesting, benign, not all that big, I'd call them mid-range organization prior to January 6th. At this point, it seems like they're a household name, but founded by Stuart Rhodes, graduate of Yale Law School, himself a veteran. And I think where the rub may be coming on his approach to his organization was he tried to bring together veterans, first responders, LEO, to be able to do some civilian response. Initially, it's formed in response to Hurricane Katrina. They tried to send in folks to assist. We all know that FEMA completely dropped the ball and created the second disaster in that situation. Politicians on the ground were trying to say, disarm yourself. We can't have anybody with a firearm in the middle of a situation that we can't even police. Clearly, that makes sense. And the Oath Keepers has sort of, gone around, if you will, in the background. There is one magazine article I do reference in my book where a reporter states that he was given access to the membership list, and it's somewhere in an approximate 30,000 members range. When you think about an organization of that size, not even filed as a 501c3, not really conducting any particular level of business, certainly not a 501c4, which, everybody, your 501c3 is your nonprofit organization. Your 501c4 is your lobbying arm, right? Those are your political activists who walk the halls of your state house or Congress. So, Oath Keepers is not a 501c3. It's not a 501c4. Stuart's kind of been ahead of it for a while. It's a good organization, but not particularly interesting until you get to January 6th. And then all of a sudden, it's the headline.
It's crazy. And again, my blood's running cold from this is the fact that, honestly, before we had started talking, I had not even heard about Jessica Watkins. And so I'm going to tell right now, if you're one of those podcast listeners that never reads the show notes, you can pull them up depending on which platform you're listening to us. You can pull it up on your phone or other device that you're listening to us on and see the show notes, or you can go to assortedcalibers.com and look up this episode, and I will have as many articles as I can about Jessica Watkins so that you can read up on them, as well as links to Paloma's book, Events of January 6th, What Impact the Second Amendment Movements, the Activists Workbook. So, Paloma, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us.
Thank you, Weird Beard, and thanks to everybody who's tuning in. This is how we get the truth to be what comes front and center.
So the moment I finished listening to this interview, I immediately got on my cell phone and I started pestering the hell out of Weer'd. It's like, give me Paloma's number. I need to talk to her because I got questions about this case that I don't think you have the answers to. And Weer'd said, oh, check the PDF in the show notes. It's like, okay, fine, I'll do that. Nope, answer's still not there. Give me the number. And he did. It's not like I had to beat it out of him or anything, but, he encouraged me to look at the reference material first. And so I called Ms. Capanna, and to her credit, she was very happy to talk to me for 30 minutes. And I'm really upset about this. First of all, the fact that any American citizen is being renditioned like this is appalling, disgusting. And I could actually accept monstrous as well, because this is cruel and unusual punishment for someone who has not been indicted of any crime. I mean, not even convicted, but hasn't been indicted yet, and is being denied all sorts of constitutional rights. And then, of course, I immediately identified with this because I'm sitting here wondering, is part of the reason she's being maltreated is because she's transgender. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask certain questions. And I'm not going to go into specifics of some of those questions, but the short version is we don't know, and could very well be, but we don't know for certain one way or the other. Here's what I do know, is that Ms. Watkins had a legal name change in 2005, and along with that name change, she legally changed her gender marker, which means that in the eyes of the law, she is female. So why is she in a male jail? It sounds like she's being kept in solitary, which honestly is probably good for her, because in that same jail, someone else was just had the crap beaten out of him, such that when that person was investigated, or I should say the assault was investigated, somebody said, we need photographs of what he looked like before. Mm-hmm. So Paloma did some digging, and it turns out that even though Ms. Watkins is female in the eyes of the law, she's not female in the eyes of the jail, because the jail is privately owned. I believe that's what she said. If there's an error, it's on my part, not on hers. And it's the jail that gets to make these rules. And so because of that lovely Chevron deference, which I hate, the judge basically said, there's nothing we can do about it. So you have a woman who is being kept naked in a male jail. This is barbaric. Mm-hmm. And so I said, look, I want to help. I don't know how I can help. Please tell me how I can help. And if she need, and Ms. Capanna she's digging into this, and so if she needs money to file FOIA requests, hey, guess what? Operation Blazing Sword is going to help, because I've read the documentation. This is so on January 6th. After the storming of the Capitol, Ms. Watkins talked to Maryland police. I believe she walked up to them, but regardless, they asked her for her name and identification, and she gave it to them. She did not act like someone who was convinced they had committed a crime. When she discovered that she was under investigation, she drove to a different state. I don't remember where she was, but she basically crossed state lines to help the government, and she turned herself in. These are not the actions of someone who is guilty. This is the action of someone who is complying with an investigation because they believe that they are innocent. Mm-hmm. And she's being treated like this. And so she's an innocent woman, as far as I can tell. She's a gun owner. She's trans. This just rings all my bells. And so if there's any way Blazing Sword can help with this, I'm going to find a way to help out. And so I asked Paloma, well, what can I do? And, I can't donate money right away. Fortunately, Paloma's not on the clock here. She's doing this because she wants to. God bless her. But what she did say is that we can draw attention to the case by promoting her book and having people buy it.
Mhm.
And so, yes, absolutely. Before I hand this over to Weer'd, because I hear him itching to go to 2AM Patriot Publishing and buy the book and tell other people about the book, and let's make the name Jessica Watkins known to everyone. Hey, Weer'd, is the discount code still in effect?
It is there until Independence Day. So those are the patrons of the show that get this on the early release. It is still active. For the people that, if you're listening to this on Monday, sorry, a little too late, but you know what?
And the code is Beard?
The code is Beard.
All right. So yeah, I'm how do I help? And so that was my reaction, and I may well interrupt you again, Weer'd one, if I think of something else. But for right now, you can talk.
Yeah, and I want to stress the point also. I have mixed feelings about enhanced interrogation when it comes to war. If there is a terrorist and they believe that there is stuff that might harm other U.S. troops as far as an active war goes and all that, and we are using certain approved interrogation techniques, such as the ones that are being used against Ms. Watkins. Again, I have mixed feelings about it. I feel that there is a narrow margin of when that can be used. I don't know what they're trying to get from her. Like, I don't know what she's being suspected. She's certainly not being charged with. She's already been charged, so it's not like they're trying to get a confession out of her or get her to turn in people of an organization. She appears to be not affiliated with anybody, or maybe she is loosely affiliated with the Oath Keepers, which is not a huge group.
So again, from my conversation with Paloma, what she thinks is going on is that this is a test. This is a test of, hey, can we take an American citizen and treat them like we treat POWs at Gitmo or Abu Ghraib, and will the government let us? Mm-hmm. And they picked her because, well, I don't know this, but my gut feeling is, she's icky trans. You know, who's going to come to this thing's aid? And so they picked someone that they thought no one would care about. Mm-hmm. And they are seeing if they can get away with it. And if they get away with it this time, they'll do it again. I believe it was last week when you were talking with Paloma, and she was talking about how there's this trend that what is happening to foreign detainees may actually, it seems like it's no longer a case of may come to the United States, but has come, and it's just a matter of time. So that's why I think they're doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so as Paloma said in the interview, the wider thing to also be concerned about is if an addendum to the Patriot Act gets set forward, or some other action that allows us to further focus on American citizens acting within the United States as domestic terrorist groups, and therefore allow them to do such things to prisoners. We need to oppose it. Even if you think that it's going after people you don't like, guess what? We're all Americans here. We may not necessarily agree with everything, but we don't want a civil war, and we certainly don't want I guess it's a civil war if it's the government versus the people, but it's all bad. It's all bad.
Well, I don't know. I think that's more of an insurrection than a civil war, because a civil war, well, I don't know. I talked myself out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's civil war.
An insurrection might be
state,
a civil war.
Yeah, totalitarian. It's just 1984 is not an instruction manual. It was a warning.
Yeah. Oh my God. So this relates to something that I have said before, and I will continue to say again, and it pertains to politics. Usually it pertains to statecraft, to legislation, and that is, never give your political party a power that you would not want your opponents to have, because you will not be in power forever. That pendulum will eventually swing, and then the people you think don't deserve it will have that power, and you've just given them the keys to the kingdom, because what they saw you do, they're going to do it to you, and there's going to be interest. Now, I'm not saying we necessarily saw this coming with the Patriot Act. I mean, this was 20 years ago. I was in my 20s. I kind of didn't really pay attention to a lot of the objections. But I do remember a lot of people saying, this has got some bad stuff in it that's going to come back to bite us in the rear end. Mm-hmm. And here we are. So, again, anytime there's this fantastic power, think about how it can be misused, because it's the government. It will be misused. Governments are made of people, and people are all inherently corruptible. I'm not saying everyone is evil, but we all have that potential of evil within us, and every villain is the hero of their own story. So, yeah, just in general, oppose a lot of government abilities, because, oh man... What was that line? Some of the most frightening words you can ever hear are, "We're from the government and we're here to help."
Yeah. All right, I have had absolutely enough of this. My blood pressure is up, as I'm sure yours as well. So, I'm cueing the music, and I'm thanking our listeners, every one of them. Very special thanks to our supporters on Patreon. If you want to, you can be our Patreon patron. Go to patreon.com/Assorted Calibers podcast to sign up. You get an early release of the podcast, and those are the ones that hear, oh, yeah, I can still use the bonus code. And they get bonus content like our blooper reels and our ACP film tracks and the ACP Mag Dump.
Also, please remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice, and share the show with your friends both online and off. And buy Paloma's book.
Yes, buy Paloma's book. Use offer code BEARD. Even if it's after the 4th, just put it in there. And you can get to my blog, which is weirdworld.com. That's WEERD world.com. And hear me weekly on Handgun Radio on the Firearms Radio Network.
And you can get more from me at blazingsword.org, pinkpistols.org, Pink Pistols Announcements on Facebook. Oh my god, I just drew a blank on my own blog names. Lurking Rhythmically is my nerd blog, and Blue Collar Prepping. BCP and ACP. I have a thing for CPs, apparently.
Well, there you go. You're a certified public accountant. And thanks to Nate Spencer for our music.
I don't know how to end this, and neither does he, but that's because my creativity is exhausted after a long, hard day, and he's just a dumbass. Our contributions to the podcast are, of course, assorted, as I kick him in the crotch again and again. And so is our podcast. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Please, can I have another?